In Texas, a raging fire turns a couple's home into a death chamber. Investigators believe it's arson, but they'll need an expert to sniff out the truth. After a student in Illinois disappears, police fear that she's the victim of a murder. The crime scene may have gone cold, but at least one tracker is still hot on the trail. Detectives in Tennessee suspect that a missing persons case has turned into a homicide. To make their case, they must rely on canine detectives to dig up the truth. When plotting a murder, a clever killer will do anything to cover his tracks. But not all clues can be concealed. When investigators lose sight of their prey, it falls upon a special breed of dog to pick up the scent of the kill. On June 8, 1994, around 3:15 a.m., a pizza delivery man in the rural community of Belleville, Texas, was on his way home after working the late shift. He spotted a man pulling out of the driveway of a burning house. The driver flagged down the delivery man. He identified himself as Charles Fitz. Fitz said his wife was trapped inside their burning home. He begged the delivery driver to call 911. By the time the fire department arrived, intense flames and heat consumed the home. As long as the fire burned out of control, firefighters could only battle the blaze from the outside. Inside, chances for Francis Fitz's survival vanished with the rest of the couple's home. Emergency medical technicians arrived to treat Charles Fitz. Disoriented and upset, he blamed the fire on the cheap wiring that ran through their home. With difficulty breathing, Fitz was transported to the hospital for treatment of smoke inhalation. By the time the flames were extinguished, some 3 hours later, the house was reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble. Somewhere inside was the body of Francis Fitz. Detectives began their routine investigation into the cause and origin of the deadly fire. They started with a visit to Charles Fitz, who was recovering in the hospital. Fitz told them that he'd fallen asleep that night on the sofa. In the early morning hours, he woke up to a house filled with smoke. He tried to get to the bedroom to save Frances, his wife of 17 years. But the smoke and flames were too intense. He'd tried repeatedly to get back into the house, breaking several windows in the process. But all of his rescue attempts failed. It was a harrowing account. But to investigators at the Austin County Sheriff's Department, the story was at odds with Fitz's physical condition. Sheriff's Deputy Richard Holloman explains.
According to what he was telling us, there should have been, some burn marks on his arms, his face, and should have singed hair, but of which he had none.
The next morning, investigators proceeded to the fire scene. Francis Fitz was found in what used to be the couple's bedroom. Her charred remains were transported to the morgue. The medical examiner would later confirm that the cause of death was smoke inhalation. Investigators began processing the burned-out wreckage. Looking to confirm Fitz's story, they searched for signs of faulty wiring. But there was no evidence of an electrical source to the fire. Neither the gas main nor the water heater had malfunctioned. With the obvious accidental causes ruled out, there remained one possibility. The fire had been intentionally set. Investigators began looking for signs of arson. During their search, investigators found debris with alligator-like patterns on the surface. Wood rarely burns this way unless it is doused with an accelerant, like gasoline or lighter fluid. Finding traces of the fluid would be the first step in proving arson. It appeared, however, that the fire had burned away that evidence. But investigators had another tool in their arsenal. Canines can be trained to sniff out traces of arson that otherwise go undetected by humans. George Cavett of the Houston Police Department teaches dogs to search for flammable liquids called hydrocarbons.
It can be naphtha, alcohol, distilled liquor, brake fluid, anything of that nature. Coleman fuel, charcoal lighter fluid, just a large list of things that puts off the same scent that the dogs can detect. Okay, good girl, we got that. Good girl, let's check.
The dogs began searching through the remains of Fitz's house.
Back here, fetch it up for me.
Hours of searching passed with no signs of a hit. But then they found something. And the location was just inches from where Francis Fitz's body was discovered.
Good girl. And he worked all areas of the bedroom and came back right to the flooring that the victim was laying on top of and gave me an alert, and right beside of it and on the bed springs and that whole segment.
The samples were placed in sealed cans to preserve whatever vapors remained and sent to the lab. With their suspicions raised, investigators next took the dogs to the police impound lot, where Charles Fitz's truck had been towed. The dogs were given the command to search for traces of accelerant. Again, the dogs alerted police to the presence of hydrocarbons on the gas and brake pedals. They were collected along with the other samples and sent to the lab for analysis. With the help of their canine detectives, investigators had recovered enough evidence for forensic examiners to conduct a thorough analysis.
All right, good girl.
At the lab, a piece of charcoal is inserted into each paint can containing the evidence removed from the scene. Then, the can is heated to just below the boiling point for up to 18 hours. During that time, the charcoal absorbs any hydrocarbon vapors. Any potential hydrocarbon is then removed from the charcoal with the solvent carbon disulfide. The resulting liquid is then analyzed by means of a gas chromatograph. By breaking down the substance into its various components, the gas chromatograph produces a pattern of peaks and valleys. In this case, the known pattern for gasoline came up in 3 of the 13 samples. The 2 from the interior of Charles Fitz's truck, and 1 from the bedroom where the body was found. Thanks to the accelerant sniffing dogs, the deadly blaze had been exposed as a deliberate act of arson and a homicide. And Charles Fitz the only other person in the house was the most likely suspect in his wife's death. Police in Belleville, Texas, investigating the death of Francis Fitz, killed in a house fire, believed they had uncovered a murder. Since he was the only other person in the house, Francis's husband Charles was the prime suspect. Travis Kane, the district attorney of Austin County, began delving into Charles Fitz's background.
The family of Francis Fitz told us that Charles Fitz was a braggart person who really never held a job. He was somebody who wore flashy jewelry, somebody who wore big hats and big boots, who bragged a lot and made a lot of noise about what he was going to do, but never really did anything.
Through family members, police learned that Frances, a secretary, was the breadwinner of the family, even though she struggled with debilitating arthritis.
I thought I just fixed us some spaghetti.
She was dedicated to taking care of Charles and never spoke poorly of him. Though Charles rarely gave anything of himself in return, the marriage seemed solid to outside observers. Having found no obvious marital problems, police struggled to find a motive for the deadly fire. Perhaps in one of Charles's many unsuccessful business ventures, he had made enemies. Someone seeking revenge against him could have set the fire. Detectives decided to take a closer look at some of his former associates. As investigators continued looking for answers, Francis's relatives sifted through the wreckage, looking for any mementos of their lost loved one. During their search, they found some documents that had survived the fire. Among the papers found was a list of overseas phone numbers and several insurance policies on Francis, listing Charles as the beneficiary. Investigators immediately contacted the insurance agent. They learned that Charles Fitz had recently made changes to the policies. In the months before the fire, he had upped the amount of the insurance on Francis's life and on the home. The agent told investigators that Charles Fitz stood to gain $824,000 from the deadly fire. Though the timing of the policy changes was suspicious, it wasn't proof of murder. And investigators still had to rule out the possibility that someone other than Charles Fitz had committed the crime. But all of Charles's past business associates had been dismissed as potential suspects. Now, investigators had to determine why Charles Fitz would want his dedicated and supportive wife dead. For answers, they turned to the only other piece of evidence that survived the fire. One of the overseas phone numbers led investigators to a young Englishwoman named Tracy Munns, who was living in the Philippines. Tracy reluctantly told investigators that she had had an affair with Charles Fitz while she attended college in Texas. She claimed that they planned to marry after she graduated. Charles had agreed to leave his wife. But Tracy grew frustrated when Charles didn't keep up his end of the bargain. She moved to the Philippines and tried to cut ties. Charles wouldn't let it go.
Then in June of '94, he called her and said, "My wife is gone. I'm free to come down to you." And she said, "No, I don't want to have anything to do with you." And that was the last time she spoke to Charles Fitz.
By killing his wife, investigators believed that Charles Fitz was clearing the way to be with his mistress.
tell you what, let me...
The insurance payoff would give him enough money to start a new life overseas. Though Tracy Munns had provided investigators with a possible motive, they needed to find proof that Fitz had planned his wife's murder. Poring over the suspect's financial records, investigators learned that Charles Fitz had sold his second car, a Mercedes, shortly after the fire. Though it didn't seem like much of a clue, they tracked down the classified ad and the man who bought the car. To investigators, the language of the ad was telling. It read, "1983 Mercedes, must sell, leaving country." The man who bought the car said that during the sale, Fitz told him that he was unmarried. The ad and the information from the car buyer, in addition to the arson uncovered by the accelerant sniffing dogs, was enough for investigators to arrest Charles Fitz for murder. Detectives theorized that Charles Fitz believed he had everything to gain from torching his house and killing his wife. Not only would it give him a huge amount of money, it would clear the way for him to be with his young lover. But he would be disappointed. 1 week after the fire, Fitz proposed to Tracy, only to find that she'd already married someone else. On February 2nd, 1996, Charles Fitz was found guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. By picking up the scent of arson, dogs in Texas brought a killer to justice. But in the Midwest, police couldn't prove a murder had been committed until they got some help finding the victim. On March 5th, 1987, a distraught father contacted the Champaign, Illinois Police Department. Ludwig Warner believed his 22-year-old daughter Karen was missing. It was a Thursday, and he hadn't seen her or her car since Monday morning. Her purse, wallet, and eyeglasses were also gone. His daughter frequently spent the night at friends' homes, but she'd never been gone for this long without checking in. The next day, detectives questioned Karen Warner's friends. Like the young woman's father, none of them had seen her in 4 days. One close friend told investigators that over the last week she hadn't noticed anything unusual about Karen's behavior. Though Karen had recently lost her job, she was looking forward to resuming her college career in the fall. Karen hadn't mentioned any plans to travel. But that didn't mean that she hadn't taken an unexpected trip. In fact, Karen had recently been getting calls from an ex-boyfriend named Curly B. Lee. He wanted to rekindle the romance, but Karen was planning to tell him in person that she wasn't interested. Curly had become too possessive and physically abusive. But it was possible that Karen had a change of heart. During their time as a couple, Karen and Curly frequently took unplanned vacations. Investigators at the Champaign Police Department believed there was a reasonable explanation for Karen's disappearance. Sergeant Jim Luking explains.
She was gone, he was gone, and her car was gone. It could very well have been that they decided to go off together, which wouldn't be all that unusual for two people to decide to do that.
To find out, investigators paid a visit to Curly Lee. When they were led into his rooming house, they found that Curly and his clothes were gone. and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But Karen's family didn't buy it. Desperate for answers, they urged the media to get involved. Hoping to generate a lead, pictures of Karen, her car, and of Curly were published in the area newspapers, along with details of her disappearance.
Her name is Curly B. Lee.
No one responded about Karen, but someone had seen Curly. The caller reported that a friend of hers had driven Curly to the bus station 2 days after Karen's disappearance. Curly said he was heading south to his mother's house in Hughes, Arkansas. Champaign police contacted law enforcement in Arkansas and asked them to speak with Curly. Like the rest of Karen's friends, Curly said that he had no idea where his ex-girlfriend could be. He said they had spoken briefly before he left Champaign, but that was just to say goodbye. As investigators struggled to find answers, the family's publicity campaign paid off. A man in Danville, Illinois, 30 miles from Champaign, recognized the photograph of Karen's car. He believed that same car was sitting abandoned in his church parking lot. A check of the license plates confirmed that it was the vehicle registered to the missing woman. If any questions remained about Karen Warner's fate, the discovery of her abandoned car erased them.
That was the first physical evidence that there was something wrong. It would be unusual for her to be there, for her car to be there especially.
Investigators brought the car to the police station for a more detailed forensic examination. But the initial search of the vehicle indicated no obvious signs of a struggle. The car was thoroughly dusted for prints. Technicians collected blue and red fibers found on the floor mats and in the trunk. The items were forwarded to the crime lab for further analysis. Hoping someone had seen how the car ended up in Danville, police turned again to the public for help. And again, the strategy paid off. A woman called police to tell them that she may have seen the car. Police brought her in to identify the vehicle.
I was driving.
The woman's name was Rhonda, and like Karen, she too was an ex-girlfriend of Curly Lee's. She recognized the car immediately. Police questioned her further. Rhonda admitted that she had driven the car around the time Karen had been reported missing. But she had no idea that the car belonged to Karen Warner. She told investigators that Curly had called her one night asking for a favor.
He said he was going to return the car to a friend.
He needed to return a car to a friend in Danville and asked her to drive him because he didn't have a license.
You know what was in the bag? Did he get it in?
To Detective Mike Smith, Curly's demeanor sounded suspicious.
What we're trying to do, and a plate is missing. She asked him whose car it was, and he never replied. He never answered. And he told her to avoid certain streets and to drive fast.
Rhonda said that Curly then dropped her off at a bar in Danville. She remembered that he had a grocery bag with him in the car, but she never saw what it contained. Curly explained that he had a few errands to run and told her to wait for him in the bar. He gave Rhonda some money for a drink, then drove away. About 15 minutes later, Curly returned to the bar on foot.
He said that he didn't have a valid
Later
driver's
that night,
license.
he had some friends drive them back to Champaign. Rhonda hadn't heard from Curly since.
No.
Investigators suspected that in the 15 minutes that Curly had left Rhonda alone, he would have had time to dispose of Karen's body, which was likely hidden in the trunk. They believed he then abandoned the car in the church parking lot, located just a few blocks away, and then returned to the bar on foot. They now focused their attention to finding Karen Warner's body, and they believed it was in the wooded area behind the bar.
He was only gone long enough that he couldn't have gone very far to place the body anywhere else, so it had to be down there. In our opinion, it had to be down there in the weeds or in the brush or in the river.
But finding a body in this densely wooded area would be difficult. There were no obvious grave sites. And in the cold air, any smell of decomposition had been hampered. After 2 days of searching, the team had reached their limits. But investigators had one more option. They called upon the expertise of Joyce Fairs, a dog handler from nearby Urbana, Illinois. For over 15 years, Fairs and her dogs have volunteered their services to local police and sheriff's departments. Bloodhounds like hers are bred to distinguish the vaguest of scents. The handler has to begin with a scent article. It can be any object the victim has come in contact with. In this case, investigators got a t-shirt and a pillowcase from Karen Warner's bedroom and sealed them in a plastic bag to preserve the scent. Fairs then gave the dog the find command, letting him know his job is to find the source of that same smell.
Check it out.
The bloodhound took Fairs on a twisted route. 3 times he brought her down close to the river, as if someone had carried Karen's body, looking for a place to hide her, then deciding against it. Then the dog led Fairs to a deep ravine, but it would have been difficult for anyone to cross this gorge carrying a body. Investigators knew that the body had to be near. Within 15 minutes, the dog closed in on an area of brush. At first, Joyce thought he'd lost the scent, but then, in a slight depression covered with brush, she caught a glimpse of a red sweater and a human hand. Investigators in Champaign, Illinois struggled to solve the disappearance of 22-year-old Karen Warner. Hidden in a remote wooded area, Joyce Fairs and her bloodhound believed they had finally found her.
And then I could see her hand, the back of her right hand. And that's when I shouted for Jim Looking to come. I believed that we'd found her body.
After removing the body, investigators began scouring the area for clues. Nearby, investigators recovered a blue blanket. 100 yards from where the body was found, they discovered a grocery bag like the one Rhonda described. Inside, investigators found shoes, eyeglasses, and a purse. All of the items were collected and sent on to the crime lab.
Okay, hold those for me. Just
Joyce Fairs and her dog had uncovered a homicide, and investigators had little doubt that they had found Karen Warner. Using dental records, the medical examiner confirmed that the remains were those of Karen Warner. And a fracture to one of the bones in her throat told him that the young woman had been strangled to death. The lack of defensive wounds and other injuries suggested that Karen had been caught off guard. Now, investigators had to make a murder case. And Karen's ex-boyfriend, Curly B. Lee, was their prime suspect. They turned to the crime lab for help. Examiners confirmed that blue fibers recovered from the victim's clothes matched the fibers from the blue blanket found near the body. Next, the blue fibers from the crime scene and red fibers taken from Karen's sweater were compared against the blue and red fibers found in the trunk of Karen's car. All of the fibers matched. Examiners had proven that Karen Warner had been wrapped in a blanket and then placed in the trunk of her car. And the last person known to have driven the vehicle was Curly B. Lee. Illinois police now had enough evidence to arrest him for murder. But as they headed south to Arkansas to pick him up, they learned from authorities that Curly had fled again. But this time, police quickly tracked him down. By canvassing bus stations, Arkansas police learned that Curly had just purchased a ticket to Palm Beach, Florida. Investigators contacted law enforcement in Palm Beach. They staked out the bus station, waiting for the unsuspecting fugitive to arrive. Curly was arrested and extradited to Illinois. Back in Champaign, investigators confronted Curly with the case they'd built against him. He admitted killing Karen, but claimed it was an accident. All of the evidence suggested otherwise. Police theorized that Curly had tried to rekindle his romance with Karen. But when Karen refused his advances, he erupted into a rage.
He didn't like to lose anything, and he decided that he was going to teach her a lesson. Now, whether he intended to kill her or accidentally killed her, I don't know, but I think if you strangle somebody, you intend to kill them.
After killing her, Curly struggled to come up with a plan to cover up his crime. He collected Karen's belongings in a grocery bag and then searched for a blanket to wrap the body in before carrying her out to the trunk. Later that night, after dropping Rhonda off at the bar, he drove behind the property and searched for a place to get rid of his victim. In an effort to make it appear that Karen had simply taken off, he drove her car to a nearby church and abandoned it. 2 days later, he packed up his belongings and fled to Arkansas. But with Joyce Fares and her bloodhound on his trail, Curly's run quickly came to an end. Curly B. Lee was convicted of murder and concealment of a homicide. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. In the Karen Warner case, the dog had to follow a trail that was 7 days old. To solve a murder in Tennessee, another canine will have to track a scent buried for almost a year. In June of 1996, Ray and Fleeta Holliday went to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for help in finding their 39-year-old daughter, Kathy Beadle.
So tell me what you found out.
In April, they said, they received a letter from her saying that she discovered she had cancer and was headed to a clinic in Toronto for experimental treatment. She said that she didn't want any direct contact with them during the therapy. From then on, Kathy communicated only by fax. The typed messages were brief and impersonal, completely out of character for their daughter. Fearing that Kathy might be going through some kind of emotional breakdown, Ray went to Toronto to find his daughter. He got the address off a Father's Day card Kathy had sent the month before. As he approached the front of the treatment center, a panic set in. The address belonged to a run-down and abandoned building. There was no cancer treatment center and no clue to his daughter's whereabouts. Fleta Holliday added that just before her daughter disappeared, Kathy was considering leaving her husband, Tony Vick. But Kathy had 2 children from a previous marriage to think about. Her first husband had died tragically in a plane crash. As part of the insurance settlement, Kathy received $8,000 a month. Though she had become wealthy as a result, she wanted her kids to have a father figure. But Kathy seemed to have fallen out of love with Tony. And though he made every attempt to get back in her good graces, Kathy didn't want to talk to him. She told her mother that she might need some time to herself in the near future to sort things out. With no evidence suggesting a crime had taken place, investigators at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation believed that Kathy had simply kept her word. But Kathy's parents knew their daughter would not leave her 2 kids behind and disappear without a trace. Desperate for answers, they mounted their own publicity campaign, plastering Kathy's picture all over Tennessee. But the family never heard a word. In February of 1997, nearly a year since Kathy had disappeared, Ray and Fleta Holliday made one last attempt to get the police involved. They contacted the Knox County Sheriff's Office. They told investigators that a few months back, Kathy's husband, Tony Vick, had also disappeared, claiming he was going to find his wife. He left the children and the couple's home with the Hollidays. They hadn't heard from Tony since. The resulting financial strain forced Ray and Fleta to sell their daughter's home. But before they did, they wanted to be absolutely sure that there weren't any overlooked clues in the home. Sheriff Tim Hutchinson took the case.
Once we learned that all the events that had occurred prior to us being notified that, number one, she was missing from our jurisdiction, and second, it had been a long period of time. That's hard to follow up and start an investigation when that much time has lapsed.
Investigators processed the empty home, searching for any clues that could help them determine Kathy Beadle's fate. But since the home had been placed on the market, a vast amount of potential evidence had been destroyed. Furniture and belongings had been removed. Floors had been scrubbed. Walls had been painted. For investigator Terry Lee of the Knox County Sheriff's Office, working a cleaned crime scene means looking past the obvious.
For instance, in this situation, the carpet had been vacuumed. That's taken up good forensic evidence such as hair, fiber samples, and so forth that we would normally collect. So you have to look a little bit deeper.
Investigators scrutinized every inch of the home. They processed all of the sink drains in the home using luminol, a chemical that glows in the presence of blood. Traces of blood were found in 3 separate sink traps. The traps were removed and sent to the crime lab. investigators determined that the blood found in the sink was human. But the samples were too deteriorated for a more comprehensive analysis. Still, the presence of so much blood led detectives to suspect something violent had happened in the couple's home. Investigators in Tennessee struggled to solve the mysterious disappearance of Kathy Beadle, a 39-year-old mother of two, missing for over a year. After searching her and her husband's vacant home, investigators believed they had uncovered evidence of foul play. They decided to take a closer look at Kathy's husband, Tony Vick. What they found was not encouraging.
And then we learned that Tony Vick's first wife died suspiciously. Some say she slipped and fell and drowned in a bathtub.
Others said that Tony had murdered her. But instead of being charged, Vick turned a profit, earning life insurance payoffs that totaled over $600,000. Investigators now feared that Kathy Beadle met a similar fate. And they believed money was the motive for murder. But investigators were a long way from making their case. They had no body, and their prime suspect, Tony Vick, had also disappeared. Hoping to generate a lead, details of the case were published in area newspapers. The tactic worked. The owner of a local consignment shop called police. She recognized Tony Vick.
They belong to my wife.
The woman stated that a few months back, a man dropped off a lot of expensive clothing. He seemed glum and told her that his girlfriend had just died of cancer. He told the owner that he would return for the check once the clothes had been sold. He never did. The check, made out to Tony Vick, remained unclaimed. For investigators, Tony's statements to the consignment store owner had a very clear meaning.
That tells us that, you know, she's definitely deceased. We just need to keep digging, need to keep looking until we can find her body.
To build their case against Tony Vick, Knox County sheriffs needed to know his every move prior to his disappearance. Investigators tracked down the nanny who took care of his and Kathy's children. She hadn't observed any violence between Kathy and Tony, nor did she notice any sign of struggle in the home following Kathy's disappearance. But she was able to offer investigators an unusual piece of information. She remembered that after Kathy disappeared, Vick scolded her and the kids for playing in the backyard. Investigators suspected that there was another reason for his outburst. They now believed that Kathy Beadle was buried somewhere in her own backyard. A team of forensic investigators went back to Tony and Kathy's vacant house. Now they were looking for a clandestine grave, one that had been dug a year earlier. But after hours of searching, they could find no evidence of a burial site. Unless investigators could find Kathy's body, making a murder case against Tony Vick would be difficult. And they were running out of ways to accomplish that goal. In Tennessee, investigators from the Knox County Sheriff's Department believed their missing person, Kathy Beadle, had been murdered. they believed her body had been buried somewhere in her backyard. But hours of exhaustive searching yielded no clues. Investigators had one more option. At Knox County's Canine Unit, dogs are trained to search for a variety of scents, from narcotics to explosives to fugitives. Working with dogs since 1994, Sergeant Robert Spangler has come to appreciate the animal's ability to pick up where the human senses leave off.
Their sense of smell is 200,000 times to 500,000 times what a human is. And that's basically what they're good for. And if there's any kind of scent there, human or non-human, they're going to pick it up where a human can't, even by looking.
But even Sergeant Spangler had doubts as to whether the dog could detect a body after it had been buried for a year. In March of 1997, he and his dog were brought to Vic's backyard, where he gave his partner the command to search for a human scent. As they approached a pile of wood, he noticed the signs of an alert. The dog was telling them to dig beneath the woodpile. Shortly after they began digging, investigators struck a layer of concrete. Knowing that evidence could be anywhere, they carefully sifted through the soil. As they dug further with their hands, trying not to break the concrete, they realized that the dog had discovered a grave. In the concrete, they could see the outline of a body. Once the cement was carefully removed, they could see the body of a woman wrapped in a sleeping bag and a layer of plastic. The body was sent to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The medical examiner confirmed through dental records that this was the body of Kathy Beadle. Some snapped cartilage in her neck told her that she died from strangulation. Someone had killed her with his bare hands. That someone, investigators believed, was her husband, Tony Vick. The sheriff's department finally had the evidence they needed to secure an arrest warrant for Tony Vick. But they still didn't know where he was. His photograph and description were entered into the NCIC, a database that connects law enforcement agencies throughout the country. A few days later, Knox County sheriffs received a call. Tony Vick was apprehended for stealing a $100 suit from a store outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey. When police there ran his name through their database, they learned that he was wanted for much more than shoplifting. Detectives theorized that soon after the death of his first wife, Vick had his eye on Kathy, not for her love or companionship, but strictly for her money. The man Kathy came to trust and love soon began plotting her murder. A year before Kathy disappeared, Tony gave Ray and Fleeta Holliday a fax machine. He knew that in order to collect the $8,000 a month Kathy received from her first husband's death, it would need to appear as if she were alive. In April of 1996, after all of the elements of his plan were in place, Tony Vick carried out the murder in the couple's home. After strangling her, he dug a grave, then covered it with concrete, thinking it would conceal his guilt from the world. He then sent faxes to the family in Kathy's name, assuring them that their daughter was alive. But Sergeant Spangler's dog uncovered the truth. Tony Vick was convicted of the first-degree murder of Kathy Beadle and sentenced to life in prison. He was subsequently found guilty of killing his first wife. He received an additional life sentence. When the human senses reach their limit, man's best friend can become a detective's greatest asset. Whether they're used to sniff out arson, track a missing person, or uncover a hidden grave, no rival can beat the dog when it comes to finding the scent of the kill.